and railroad industries fed an explosive growth of manufacturing in San Francisco in the late 19th and early 20th century. And so this huge new labor force is drawn there, often with strong activist backgrounds, a lot of Irish immigrants with a lot of activist background, but all sorts of other folks as well. But one of the things to remember about it is that labor force was never enough for the growth. In other words, workers had a little bit of bargaining power just by their numbers. They're always in demand. I mean, there's always booms and busts in the economy, but San Francisco was, in a sense, organized workers' mecca. Because workers were in such high demand, their organizing chances could be maybe successful. And San Francisco soon became known as the most thoroughly organized labor town, really in America. Especially those in trades like the Teamsters and the construction trades that were localized, right? They're there and they can't get those folks elsewhere. But contrast this with LA, which had almost no industry. In the early 1900s, the joke always was that 50% of LA's people had jobs selling houses and empty lots to the other 50% of LA's people. I mean, that was basically it, right? No real big industry. And LA began to sell itself to would-be investors as the most anti-union city in the country. They were the open shop world. San Francisco was supposed to be the closed shop, the union town. San Francisco advertised itself as an open shop. It's a misnomer to call Los Angeles as the open shop. It's a misnomer to call Los Angeles an open shop. It's a closed shop on the other side of the door is what it is. They locked out all union workers and actually ran them out of town after beating the hell out of them a lot of the time. Another interesting characteristic of California, I think, related to the boom style of the economy, was the quick growth of an enormously wealthy and powerful capitalist class. And when I say capitalist class, I'm talking just plain capitalists, right? I mean, these folks who have enormous amounts of wealth that they're shoving into the major industries of the country, of the state. But also, these fortunes were created, a lot of these fortunes were created almost totally by government fiat. That is, you seize an enormous amount of public land and you create PG&E. You seize an enormous amount of public land and create a vast land-holding empire in Kern County that you're going to, that stays to today. The federal government votes in a law giving you 9 million acres of land to build a railroad, the Central Pacific and the Southern Pacific going right through our neighborhood here, right? That's just given to 4 guys, right? You've heard about that story, right? The Big Four. We don't have to get into that. But they started out with $12,000 and a map and a little piece of paper that said Central Pacific Railroad. Right? That's it. And then we passed the Pacific Railway Act, and they got, in the end, around $400 million. Nice work if you can get it. But what I'm saying is that class just sort of, boom, all of a sudden is there. There's this oligarchy here in California in the late 19th and early 20th century that acted like California was their own private possession. And that was enormously offensive to those who thought they lived in a democracy. San Francisco versus Los Angeles. And what does that mean? That means that the kind of style of conflict that happens in California, this isn't my terms, the old, 100 years ago almost, Kerry McWilliams talks about total engagement in California, a kind of characteristic struggle between workers and their bosses. Those who thought they lived in a democracy trying to eke out a living when there's this oligarchy that has just taken over. So we're going to see here, I'm going to start in 1901 with this long struggle just for basic recognition of the right to join a union, of the right to strike, of the right to ask somebody else to join a union. Literally, right, folks? I mean, it used to be in the day, if there was a judge had passed had signed an injunction, and said, hey, look, there's you can't be organizing anymore. If you then talk to somebody and say, hey, I think you should quit work in solidarity with me, you can be thrown in jail without a trial, right? I mean, that's the kind of world we're kind of talking about with injunction law. That's what I mean when I say they thought they lived in a democracy, but they had to win these kinds of rights. Well, because of the stark division lines between the classes in California, let me show you. Actually, I love this guy right here. Some of these people, you look at them and it's like, yeah, you've seen that picture before. There's a billion of them, right? These old ones, and you go into the Elks Club of some rundown place in some rural town, and you see all the pictures there. That's Andrew Perusa, head of the Sailors Union. Think about what these guys are trying to do. The sailors were trying to get the right to quit their job, which wasn't legal until the early 20th century. They were trying to get the right to not be beaten at work by the captain of their ship, right? And they actually win this. I forget what year it was, with the help of fighting Bob Wallet from Wisconsin. They actually passed a law that finally gives those basic sorts of rights. Well, in 1901, there was a waterfront strike in San Francisco where all the major powers in the unions, the warehousemen, the Teamsters, the sailors, and the dockers, right, the longshore workers, they all formed the City Front Federation, all these unions working together to go on strike and shut down the port. The employers did the same thing. So you got organized employers, organized workers, and now we're set to fight. Well, 1901, they had a lot of radical priests in San Francisco at the time. He criticized Mayor Phelan was the mayor of San Francisco at the time. I had a policy of prostituting the police force of the city for the capitals. That's pretty straightforward from a priest. I like this. I can't do an Irish accent. That would be kind of stupid, wouldn't it? We have in this country two things. There's capital and labor. The men who have the money made and the men who want to make the money. The men who have the money made have the whip hand over the other fellow. Therefore, it has become necessary to put the fear of God Almighty into these capitalists. You get the sense of it right there, right? So, there's a real support from the church. Phelan tried to play the neutral role, right? But in the end, when the Employers Association decided that they wanted the port open, Phelan, of course, sends the cops in. So the San Francisco police go in, but they do more. This happens a lot too in our history. There's not enough police to conquer an entire city. And so what you do is you deputize people. Yep. You just very quickly just say, all right, all y'all are part of the cops today, give you an axe handle, now go out and crack some heads. Yeah. So these are really violent moments, and I would never suggest that the union movement in the early 1900s on the docks in San Francisco, they were all just standing there holding hands and going kumbaya, right? No, there's fighting going on. Remember, there's no law, right? There's no law there's no law that says that you have to recognize a union. And so these get pretty rough. Well, in the end, the union loses, they're crushed, and so they move into politics. They move into politics, and that's a whole long, ugly story, but they form the Union Labor Party, which rules on and off in San Francisco for the next 12 years. But there's an enormous corruption scandal. The Union Labor Party is controlled by Boss Ruth of San Francisco. Anyway, that's a whole other kind of story. But what I'm saying there is that you go into politics, you want to avoid having your mayor break your strike. By the way, this is Boss Ruth. He's a lawyer. He's running for San Francisco. This is Edward Calhoun, the leader, the owner of all the streetcars in San Francisco, whispering into the corruption trial. one battle after another?
Yeah.
You notice the name of Leonardo DiCaprio's character? Pat Calvin.
That was a terrible fucking movie.
You didn't like it?
Anyway, all right. If you've ever seen that
Somebody
movie in
doesn't
San Francisco,
understand black
that's
women
his
at all.
movie.
I mean, it was like an insult to somebody with black men. Like, it was freaking really disgusting. Like, pretty stupid. It seemed like bait to me.
Because of that stark division between the classes in California and the obvious power of those local elites, that oligarchy, and their willingness to really fight it out, not really compromise, California also saw a strong and strange, I think, radical tradition develop. They were never a majority, but this radical element did have an enormous influence on the labor and reform movements of California.
I thought it was incredible.
Now, when I say kind of strange, we get all kinds of, late 19th and early 20th centuries, there's all sorts of different versions of radicalism. We get the Cahuilla colony down there, right by Visalia, right? Right at the bottom of the Sierras there. They actually own the big trees that are in Sequoia right now. Sherman, the original, the big, huge Sherman tree. You know what the original name? Well, not the original name. You know what the name was when these guys owned it? The Commerce Street, yes. All right. So you have these kinds of utopian colony type folks. We had other folks engaging in all sorts of communal living kind of things. And then we had a basic social party, a socialist party that they even talked about in LA as being a kind of strange world. You got all these millionaire socialists in Pasadena, all these, what they call them, these parlor kings. They hang out in the parlor and they're drinking their tea and talking about the revolution. One of those guys is Gaylord Wilshire, who produced a very popular socialist magazine, Wilshire, as in Wilshire Boulevard. He's in LA, he's a real estate guy and a socialist. Then you got all the Christian socialists who are engaging in all sorts of progressive reforms. It's an interesting, odd mix. And then you get this kind of, I don't know, what do you call it, a tough guy socialist guy, Jack London up north, those kinds of folks. But that kind of radical movement is always in there. And even more kind of homegrown radicalism. And some of you might have been at another talk of mine where I talked about the IWW here in Fresno, maybe. So I'm just going to summarize it a little bit. But this, to me, it's not necessarily a radicalism of California, but it's very Western to me. The IWW, the industrial workers of the world, who in 1910, 1911 engaged in a free speech fight here in Fresno. The industrial workers of the world, you look at them and you think, all right, these guys are these folks are really radical. In an ultra-racist world, they said, we'll take in anybody. Almost no union did that. Almost no union said, all right, we'll take in anybody who's a worker. A lot of times, unions in the early years were white male job trusts, in a way, right? We're reserving these jobs for this group of people. The IWW didn't do that, but they also were radical. I mean, they wanted to end the wage system, dump the bosses off your back. They were anarchists. They wanted to also, forget about the state, it's going to be a problem too. So you can imagine this it's almost like an independent Western sort of, that stereotype we have of these Westerners, don't tread on me kind of crap. But at the same time, solidarity with your fellow workers. Anyway, the IWW, the industrial workers of the world, abolish the wage system. Now, some of you might have, I don't know if I've ever told this story to a crowd, but you know the wooden shoe, right? The reason why that's their symbol is because they're into sabotage. That's where the word sabotage comes from. Where you take a shoe and shove it into the gears of the machinery and break it. Break the machines to stop work. So they're for direct action on the shop floor. These folks were even against having contracts. A contract tells me that I need to do something tomorrow. Well, maybe I don't want to do it tomorrow. Maybe we're doing it. We're gonna keep our power on the shop floor. Maybe we'll have even more power tomorrow, but we're stuck with this lousy contract. We're in negotiations. Do you want to do it? Let's just go. No. We shouldn't even say it out loud. It's illegal. All right. The leaders, some of the national leaders, Big Bill Haywood came out of the Western Federation of Miners. You want to talk about class war? Oh my goodness! It's the National Guard and the local police and militia up against the miners in the Rockies, in Colorado, in Utah, in Nevada, and so on. And then Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, the rebel girl, travels all over the country, engaged in free speech fights, but also most famous for the Bread and Roses strike, if you've ever heard of that, 1912 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, 25,000 mainly women workers rising up in the textile mills in that strike. All these folks, that
Sure, brother.
you know what they
Chair.
are? They're
Good.
agitators
Thank you.
who are
Sure.
traveling to different places to organize people to stand up for themselves. This is somehow a crime. I don't know. And I was going to say they're paid agitators. They're not paid that much. Anyway. So the IWW comes to Fresno. Fresno is about 25,000, right? They set up a camp outside the outskirts of Fresno, which is Belmont and Palm, to give you an idea. Way out on the outskirts of Fresno, Belmont and Palm. They set up a camp, and they go downtown, basically where this picture is taken from. That's the walkouts, Mariposa. They go downtown and they start organizing folks, mainly Mexican-American workers who are working outside of town, who have to buy their jobs. They have to go to these labor centers where they have to pay $1 to get a job for a day, right? That kind of thing. And so the IWW is saying, well, no, we need to organize into a union so you can get a better deal. And they do soapbox speaking, get up on the soapbox and start haranguing the crowd. What happened right away is that's Chinatown there. I don't know if you've seen that picture, 1921 Chinatown. That's 10 years after this. Frank Little is the guy. Frank Little, he had family here in Fresno. He was a veteran by this time of many, many fights for the IWW, many free speech fights already. As a matter of fact, he had come to Fresno to rest because he got the crap kicked out of him so much in Spokane that he was nearly dead. So he came here that this was going on, so he immediately does it again. Talk about some guts. Well, anyway, he stands up, starts to speak. They arrest him for speaking in the streets. They arrest him and throw him in jail. And this goes on for a little while. They arrest a few other folks. But when they go to the court case, it turns out there's no law against speaking on the street. So they have to let him out. Right? So he goes back out and starts speaking on the street again. And then the city council immediately, this is Chester Roll, the mayor of Fresno, and police chief Shaw, and then Shaw asked him, right? They basically say, well, obviously it's wrong to speak. And so therefore, we should pass a law against it. And so they do. They do. And re-arrest them. They don't arrest the Salvation Army banging on their drum. But they arrest these guys. At that point, the free speech fight is on. And the IWW made a call to everybody out in the rest of the country to come to Fresno, go downtown to Mariposa and High, stand up on a soapbox, start talking, get arrested, get thrown in jail. We'll fill the jails. Fill the jails. They got it. And no work. Don't do any work. Don't break any rocks. Put your hands in your pockets. So that's basically what they did. And this goes all through the late fall and winter of 1910, 1911. And they're singing songs and all this kind of stuff, just making a general nuisance of themselves. And a lot of them were, hobos, guys who probably didn't bathe very often, so I can imagine the smell was, anyway, it's just, and the fire department was called out. They sprayed them down in the jail cell to get them to shut up, right? You've heard these stories in the civil rights movement stuff. This is Fresno, 1910, 1911, right? They're filling the jails. A mob gets together with some of the best citizens of Fresno, goes out to that tent that they have, that they're living in on Belmont and Palm, and burns it to the ground, nearly kills some people. At that point, the city's like, this is getting out of hand. there's 250 people in the jail, and so they finally just caved. And they said, all right, we'll let you have free speech here in Fresno. So, I mean, I love some of these things, because there's the Fresno cop, free speech. Right after the Spokane cop, to the head. Anyway, there you go, there's the Fresno jail. I love this one. Water cure for workers, turkey for pimps. Fresno. This is a group of folks that were coming down from Oregon, and they were on the trains. They were hoboing down to Fresno, and they got pulled off in Portland, Oregon. In Ashland, Oregon, and had to walk in the dead of winter over the mountains. Most of them didn't even make it. They, of course, you can't walk. Anyway, but these folks were headed to Fresno at the time. There's a plaque down there. But that's part of the larger story. People trying to win just the right to say, hey, you should join us and let's make a change here. Now, you might think these guys are romantic fools, that they're idiots, they're anarchists, they're anarcho-syndicalists, it's a dumb idea, but people, I would argue, have a right to be idiots if they want to be, right? I mean, this is not, you don't get to cut them off because they're idiots. By the way, personally, I don't think they're idiots. The larger context, though, I think is kind of interesting too, because it's not just in Fresno. This is that total engagement again, and that's where we get down to LA. And LA's oligarchy, the spokesperson for that oligarchy is General Harrison Gray Otis. It's called Otis Town, and then his son-in-law, Harry Chandler, is going to take over, and the Chandlers are going to own the the Los Angeles Times until when, the 1970s or something like that. But the LA Times was, and Otis was, General Otis was the most anti-union town and newspaper in the country. And one of the things that kept LA an open town, though, was this: the bombing of the LA Times building. There was a dispute going on, and some of the unions did. Now, the initial thing was, all right, this bombing happened. It killed several people, and there is some evidence that the bomb was planted near a gas main, so a small bomb became that, right, blowing up the building. But this is, I mean, this happens occasionally. Labor, in the history of labor, there's this kind of dynamite violence. As some people even talk about dynamite, that's the great equalizer. Everybody can get dynamite. This is back in the day, you could go to the hardware store and get dynamite. Anyway. But James and John McNamara there were charged with the crime. And the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, launched a great defense campaign. That's Samuel Gompers. He's getting old by this time. In the middle, he runs the AFL, and the idea is these guys are being framed up by the most anti-union newspaper people in the country. This is a frame-up. And there was a huge amount of support for these two guys. And then there was an election coming up, and a socialist was pretty much set, Joe Harriman, was pretty much set to win the election. Joe Harriman, the 1911 election in LA. So Joe Harriman was also a lawyer for these guys, one of the lawyers. What happened? There's nicer pictures. Yeah, there's Joe Harriman. At the very last minute, without telling this lawyer, Clarence Darrow, who was their other lawyer, famous civil liberties guy, Clarence Darrow made a deal with the judge and these guys that to save their lives, they changed their plea from non-guilty to guilty. They did it. Some people still hold it. They're like, no, they changed their plea because they were going to be hanged, and so you changed their plea to save your life because they could read the writing on the So you can imagine, that kind of gives labor a bad name. Does it not? I mean, this is going to give labor a bad name. And Joe Harriman and the socialists were huge in Los Angeles until this. And then, you know, they still had a lot of, and then this guy wins. Looks like Clint Eastwood a little bit, doesn't he? Anyway, all right. Right around that time, the IWW says, let's do a free speech fight in Los Angeles. I mean, that's just crazy. During the visit of the industrial workers of the world, they will be accorded night and day a guard of honor, composed of citizens armed with rifles. The coroner will be in attendance in his office every day. Right? We're going to kill you if you come here. They skipped it, went to San Diego. San Diego Tribune, hanging is none too good for them, and they would be much better dead. Remember, these guys aren't the bombers, by the way. The IWW folks aren't the bombers. They are the waste material of creation and should be drained off in the sewer of oblivion to rot like any other excrement. These little ellipses are more of the same. Just so you know. Emma Goldman showed up. Gave a speech in favor of, you know, the right to organize. She's an anarchist, right? She shows up in defense of the IWW, the most famous anarchist in the country. Her boyfriend shot Henry Clay Frick. And Ben Reitman, another lover of Goldman, he gets snatched by some of these San Diego vigilantes and driven out to the edge of town, stripped of all his clothes, tarred and feathered, you know, hot boiling tar put on you, feathers, and then a brand, IWW, right there on his ass. I mean, these folks mean business. This is what I mean, they're willing to do anything. So this long continuing struggle for the recognition of labor rights goes on. Also, in this story here of San Diego and that free speech fight, you have to remember that California is actually Mexifornia and Calico, right? Mexicali and Calexico, right? I mean, California, that border is just this line that we drew. And right across the border in 1912, what's going on? A revolution is going on. A revolution. And these IWW guys, folks, I'm saying guys, I'm a Midwesterner, I still can't get it out of my head. Who is truly considered part of the community becomes a question here, right? Because people are crossing these borders all the time. And they have the same idea of a future for workers on either side of that border, but that border changes things for them politically. One of these folks, of course, is Ricardo Flores Magón, the anarchist leader of a particular party within the revolution. They take Tijuana, believe it or not, which is right across the border from San Diego, right while this other stuff is going on. A lot of IWW folks went over there and helped them out. So this is like an international thing. There's his brother. Yeah, they lived in the U.S. most of the rest of their lives here. A lot of times in prison. As a matter of fact, I've never been able to figure it out. I don't know. There's a newspaper article way back in 1910 talking about the beginning of the free speech fight, and it says we had to arrest these guys because these IWW folks. This is before even the free speech fight started. We arrested them and threw them in jail for this one because they had some Mexican radical speaking, who was riling up the peons. This was the farm workers around, riling up the peons. That's what the Fresno Republican said about it. And I'm thinking, I wonder, was it him? I don't have any evidence of it, but it seems like, maybe he was here. There's some of the guys, Tijuana. Now, later on, he's going to be arrested during World War I, as so many of these people are, and he's going to, for violating the Espionage Act, which says you can't speak against a war. That's the Espionage Act. And he received 21 years, but of course he dies in Leavenworth. World War I, we see that the real power of folks being able to really come down on organized labor. World War I was the crisis that gave the General Otis and Harry Chandlers the excuse to really go all out on people that had been a thorn in their side for years and years, but they didn't have an emergency excuse to go and really take them on. And so this is where we see, World War I is where we really do see pretty much the destruction of the Socialist Party and the destruction of the IWW. There are people who are still wobblies, maybe even in this room, but the IWW really saw its great moments only in the 19-teens, destroyed during World War I under the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, which made it illegal to be against the war. Totally illegal. Eugene Debs, the most famous guy, delivering a 1918 speech in Canton, Ohio, saying the ruling class has always had everything to gain and nothing to lose. The working class has everything to lose and nothing to gain, and everything to lose, especially their lives. For that, he got 10 years in prison. Right? That's what we're talking about here. Frank Little, the organizer of the free speech fight, he organized a strike in Butte, Montana, and was dragged out of his bed in the middle of the night, tied to the back of a car, and hanged from a bridge. Wow. That's what happened to Frank Little. I appreciate epitaphs that are honest. Right? Slain by the capitalist interest for organizing and inspiring his fellow men. There you go. There we are.
Just you guys, huh? There's a couple spots in this one.
What? I don't know where this one is. I just Googled it the other day, and hey, there it is. It might not be you. No, it is. I was looking for him in Chicago when I was in Chicago because Emma Goldman's there, all the Haymarket martyrs are there. They're all sitting there, right there in the ground, right next to each other. Lucy Parsons. You can take pictures, selfies with these gravestones. That's for another talk, though. I didn't do any selfies this time. Mary and I were in San Francisco, and we were going to do some selfies with some of the sites, Well, this is where these guys got killed. In San Francisco, you can almost see it. The oligarchy of San Francisco is like, oh, these LA oligarchy, they got something. They had this terrorist act, and now they don't have to have unions anymore. It's going to be 25 years before LA organizes, right? And so San Francisco, well, now, this is just me babbling, right? Just so you know, this is me telling a story. I don't have records of San Francisco bigwigs saying, here's what we'll do, right, okay? But think about it. A bombing happens, the Preparedness Day bombing, 1916 in San Francisco. It's a huge parade, the Preparedness Day parade. It was Wilson's way of getting us to be for the war without being for the war. Right? He claimed to be neutral, but he's working us into a pro-war stance. Preparedness was the way to do it. Huge numbers of people in California were utterly against that. I mean, we were anti-war, World War I. What do we have to do with what's going on over there? That was kind of the idea. And especially Irish folks, right, in San Francisco. We're going to go help the Brits? Yeah, I mean, no. So this parade goes through town, and there's a bombing, and 20 people are killed. There we go, there's the parade, this huge parade, and there was a bombing. And this one, they did frame. This was a case that lasted, 10 people, well, I think it ended up being 20. This case lasted for decades. Warren Billings and Tom Mooney were thrown in prison. Mooney initially got the death penalty for this, but the governor commuted it to life in prison. And so he's sitting in prison even after everybody on the jury has said, nope, he's innocent. Even after key witnesses recanted their testimony. Even after the judge himself said, nope, this guy's innocent, what are you doing? He's still in jail. It's not until 1939 when Colbert Olson, the first sort of New Deal governor of California, wins, and he frees Tom Mooney. And then a year later, Warren Billings is out. The DA, well, anyway, we won't get into this story. But you get the sense of it. This was a huge fight for 20 years. Free Tom Mooney was the line of a lot of labor. We need to free our railroaded comrade. Demand the release of Mooney bills. These look like they're professionally printed up. I don't know if you guys are paid agitators. They're professionally printed. I don't know. Did they organize this? Did they get together and maybe plan it out? They didn't have cell phones. There's Tom Mooney. He says, "Thank you very much," and then says, "To hell with you, I'm going." He just basically retires after this. I shouldn't say that. There's Mooney again. You get this, the parade when he's released. Another step. Are you getting the sense? Sometimes in my class I'll talk about the 8-hour day, right? And we have this great fight for the 8-hour day in 1886, May Day and all that kind of stuff. That story of fighting for the 8-hour day, and they lose. The Haymarket riot happens, and there's this sullying of labor's good name for a long time, right? But every year, there's a new fight for the 8-hour day. Here and there, and some workers get it and lose it, other workers get it and lose it. Some people, railroad workers kind of get it, get the 8-hour day. But for the country, no 8-hour day until 1938. 52 years. This is what I mean by saying the long continuing struggle for recognition. 52 years of struggle before something as simple and as just basic as a reduction of hours. And remember, folks, people when they were talking about the hours of work, the thing to remember, for me at least, is that when you're at work, you're selling your creative power to somebody else who tells you what to do. And that's, in a sense, that's really kind of inhuman. We have creative powers that are our own. And to be able to control those creative powers and do what we want with them is a pretty big deal, right? And yet we live in a system, we're not slaves, that's great, that was a great victory, no more slavery. But this other thing, wages and hours, you think, well, wait a minute. I need an 8-hour day, so I'll have another 8 hours to actually use my abilities for myself for once. 12 hours, 14-hour day. I came here at 7. But I chose to do it. At the end of the war, they passed the Criminal Syndicalism Act, which made it illegal in this state to advocate for the violent or just advocate. I forget the exact language. To advocate the use of violence in changing the industrial order. This is going to be used in a way to just take on every single labor organizer they can. The Criminal Syndicalism Act. And we got a test of it, in a way, in 1923 during the San Pedro strike. Upton Sinclair, the most famous parlor pig from Pasadena, Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, that great book about Chicago and all that stuff. There he is right there. You can tell he's a parlor pig, right? Sitting there, hanging out, writing his books in his backyard. Nice work if you can get it. Anyway, he goes out to Signal Hill and he reads the First Amendment and gets busted. It's a nice little thing. And they form the California ACLU out of this. I hope Sinclair goes to jail if convicted. I would rather deal with 4,000 IWW than one man. That's a nice compliment.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Form the Southern California ACLU, trying to defend his rights. The KKK, of course, by this time was very popular, especially in Southern California, and they became the kind of stormtroopers. Them, and sadly the American Legion, became the kind of vigilante crowds that would be mobilized by the authorities to take on organized labor in LA and Orange County. This is them marching on San Pedro, IWW headquarters. They beat, burned, and tarred and feather these guys. That's the tar all over. Killed one. Let's skip ahead. California agriculture, the Great Depression. I told you I had 200 slides. You see how fast I'm going through them? Well, you know this. Ag workers here in the valley, it's down in the Imperial Valley, over in Salinas, they faced atrocious conditions in the early 1930s during the, well, throughout this entire period, right? Actually, if you haven't read Factories in the Field, this is one of the great classics. Here at this school, they always say you shouldn't assign books more than 5 years old. Well, in my California history class, several times I've assigned Factories in the Field, written in 1939. Right? It's still great. And you read a lot of other historians, and you're like, you're just copying Harry Williams. What the hell are you doing? You know. Anyway, he goes through all the details of Factories in the Field. In World War I, there were lots of jobs opening up, and people were leaving the fields. And so there were a couple of occasions of slavery here in this valley where people were literally chained at night to their beds so that they couldn't escape and go get a good job over on the coast. The Imperial Valley is where we see the initial strikes in the early 1930s. Big strikes as each crop becomes ready to pick, you go on strike. Think about that. That's an enormous amount of power, right? The moment they need you, you disappear. And you can maybe win something. But the Imperial Valley was like a feudal kind of world. It was a fiefdom of the major landowners and banks in California, especially Southern California. The rest of Central California and Northern California, that's Bank of America land. That's hugely, the Bank of America and the insurance companies connected to the landowners, the huge landowners of the Central Valley. They do not want organized labor coming in, especially during the Depression when they themselves are being squeezed. That's Salton Sea. This is the Imperial Valley. Anybody ever been down there? It's just fascinating, isn't it? This is the accident. This is an accident, right? We accidentally punched a hole in the Colorado River. The people who organized this were the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union. These folks were pretty much the only people in town at the time who organized workers in the fields. Workers in the fields, amongst a lot of the organized labor movement, they didn't have definite residences, they moved a lot, they were the wrong color, they spoke the wrong language to a lot of folks, right? There was that racism, that real kind of discrimination that goes on. And they didn't make enough to pay decent dues either. There's a piece of that. And so other unions come in. Now I'm focusing on all these radicals. I don't know why, because there's the construction trades, there's the Teamsters, there's all kinds of folks. But the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union was a communist-led union. This in the Great Depression, the communists had some members, right? The communists were never really super popular in America, but they had an influence well beyond their numbers. And partly because a lot of these organizers were willing to starve themselves and get themselves killed to organize other people, which is quite something. So you have all these different strikes in packing houses and in the fields, pea pickers, and Fresno, great strike in 1932. With the cotton strike of 1933. This is October 1933. This is one of those communist organizers, Caroline Decker. If you want, I can send you a world history of her. Being interviewed for 2 hours on this stuff. But that's her organizing the strike. This is mainly Mexican-American workers, a lot of Mexican immigrants too, a lot of Filipinos, a few African-Americans, very few white folks. The story we always get told is the John Steinbeck one of the Okies and so on. This is pre-Okie, okay? But anyway, they go on strike. They're getting paid 60 cents for every 100 pounds of cotton they pick. 60 cents for every 100 pounds. You can maybe pick 300 in a day, right? So $1.80. You do it with your whole family, but they can't pick nearly as much. They wanted $1 for every 100 pounds they picked. And war was declared. Central Valley became a kind of armed camp. These folks had what were called running pickets. They had these little jalopies going up and down the highway trying to get people to leave. There were about 20,000 folks who went out on strike. You might have seen this picture at some time in your life. The governor sends aid to Pixley. We want food. We want food aid for us. Here's some folks trying to get people to come out of the fields. Going, they're getting too noisy. They should be quiet. These whistles. They shouldn't have these whistles. There's the Corcoran camp. For years and years and years, the health department didn't care one little whit about where the labor force was sleeping, how they were eating, whether or not they had decent toilets, and so on. But when they went on strike and set up this camp, you can bet the health department came in and tried to shut it down. Right? I mean, this is the power of that oligarchy again. I like that they had a theater, though. That's cool. 4 people are killed, 2 of them in Pixley, 2 more in Arvin. We're in a crowd of people who've heard a lot of this kind of stuff. How many of you have heard the 1933 crowd strike before? Okay, we got a smattering, that's good. This should be, how many of you, when you were in the 4th grade, made a mission out of sugar cubes? right? I mean, I think, frankly, it's good to learn about the missions. I don't think it's a great idea to make them out of sugar cubes even when you're in the 4th grade. Talk about a labor crime. But not knowing about the 1933 cotton strike. This is us, folks. Right? This is us. A lot of these folks were revolutionaries too, right? That revolution in Mexico is done. They come up here. We can fight. We can. That famous picture. Disarm the rich farmer, arm the worker for self-defense. This valley and Salinas Valley, in the 1930s, this is where I think we really need to start thinking. Now, I'm just going to suggest it to you a little bit. And for years, people said that this was an overwrought sort of interpretation. But I'm going to just suggest it to you. What we're talking about in the 1930s in this valley is testing out fascism. Testing out fascism. A merger of the biggest corporate power and government power and privatizing the whole thing. When you've got a sheriff and local cops who then are able to use the treasury of some private company to hire a private army and then stamp them with an official right to go out to the fields and attack people for exercising their right to picket, to exercising their right to say, hey, come out of the fields. You've got yourself creeping, if not fascism. It's not an unusual thing to say that this is how, I'm not being crazy in saying that. Lots of the stories point this out. But that's what it is when it happens. Right? The Associated Farmers sounds like a bunch of farmers. It's basically Bank of America and a whole bunch of other insurance companies and other folks who kind of joined together with the Chamber of Commerce of LA and this other group called the Merchants and the M&M, the Merchants and Manufacturers of LA. I'll tell you what, the Chamber of Commerce of LA really did a number for us historians. They not only have the minutes for every meeting they have from 1890 to 1939 or 1945 or something. They have every word they ever said. Nobody did that back then. Nobody does it now. But you page through this, and they talk about creating this, and they talk about how these guys in Fresno are doing this. This is going to be great. And they talk about all of this stuff. They talk about forming the California Crusaders and the California Cavaliers, and how these are kind of front groups for them, but we're going to have some, prominent citizens, take charge. But you know that. I love it when they say, and this doesn't leave this room. What we need to do is hire somebody to write another book that will counteract Grapes of Wrath. We need another great, let's do that. Of course, the Syndicalism Act was very useful, and so in 1935, there was a big show trial in Sacramento. It was a very expensive trial. Caroline Decker, this is from her, every local police has a little file of a red file, spies. You know, they spy on folks. If you got a blacklist, I want to be on it. Right? But this, she's, you know, in that file, there's, she gets brought up on charges. I like that picture of her. Isn't that great? Kids that. Alias. Pat Chambers was the other person who was the major organizer there. They are both railroaded into prison. They spend most of the time in San Quentin and Tehachapi, the women's prison. And if you ever send me an email and get that tape of her, most of her time is talking about working with women in the Tehachapi prison. She spends 5 minutes talking about the strike I just told you about, and half an hour talking about how she would work with the trustees and work with the matron because she could read and write really well, and she, hey, this is so cool and so humble. It was so wonderful listening to that. You know, I think I'm my own 4 people is listening to it. Maybe somebody else should listen to it.
Paul.
Yeah.
There's a citation in Mooney and Majka. They wrote about some of this stuff. You know Mooney and Majka's book, right?
No.
Well, there's a citation I've never been able to track down. I don't know if you know about it, but they use like preeminent researchers on this time period, and they said the Associated Farmers in Fresno had Nazi affiliation.
Oh, yeah, well, that's, I removed about 6 slides. The guy was actually a state senator from Fresno. Phillips is his name.
And really?
Yeah, he said, what they're doing in Germany is wonderful.
Yeah.
This is, yeah, they were Nazis. The silver shirts down in literal Nazis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. When people say it's overwrought to say this is fascism, these guys are saying it. And there's a book about it. American fascism in the New Deal. You see it especially in Salinas. They turned Salinas into an armed camp during the lettuce strike. Just an amazing display of what can happen. Although I must say, you don't see anybody in camouflage. But anyway. Gun-kissed in Orange County.
Dunk.
Yeah, I love this picture of the press. They're all wearing their gas masks. You know, I used to say, look at how it used to be. Doesn't that hurt? Yeah. We take 1, 2, 3 steps forward and we take 2 steps back.
Or maybe it was never progress at all, man.
Meanwhile, on the waterfront, let's move back to San Francisco. And this is one, I'm hitting the highlights. Some of you probably know this stuff. This is boring. This is all the regular stuff, nothing new. Imagine fighting with one of those. You go into the hold of a ship, and there's no crane. I mean, there's no containerization, right? You go into the hold of the ship, and you've got this big net coming down, and you're going to load that net up, and you're going to move stuff around. These giant things coming down in or being pulled out. You're going to hook that with the hook, and so this becomes the symbol of the longshore workers. This is one of the great moments, I think, of American labor history. I love this moment. There's all kinds of great stuff about it, including 1930s pictures by Lang, and the shape-up. This was one of the big problems of the docks, right? It's the Depression. There's not many ships coming in, and yet there's thousands of people who need the job, right? So you go down to the docks every day, and you say, I want that job, and the straw boss says, all right, you, and you.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going
Just
to
like
unload that ship.
I
Now,
love that movie.
don't go home. Because if you, at the end of your shift, don't go home because you're not going to be chosen the next day. So a 20-hour shift, a 40-hour shift, a 72-hour shift. These guys just doesn't want that's what this is. And then the next day, you didn't kick back my, $5. You didn't let me date your sister. You didn't buy me a beer. That kind of thing, right? And then, yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah, it's called a gaff.
No, so what they do is they say, well, what we want is a union hiring hall. A union hiring hall. We want, instead of 70 cents an hour we get paid, we want $1 an hour. We want the 6-day work week. 6-hour work day, I should say. 5-day work week, 6-hour work. Isn't that nice? Why haven't we done the 30-hour week? Yeah. These guys are demanding it then. Of course, they're breaking their backs. I won't even get calluses tonight. On top of this, they had their own union that they had to join, which was owned by the employers. It was called the Blue Book Union. And if you aren't in good standing with the Blue Book Union, you see, they always say, oh, we want people to be free to work. No, they don't. Free to work for less. And in your own Blue Book Union, they had this great demonstration where everybody took their blue books. You can't work on the docks without the blue books. And they burned them. Right? Now that's like, it ain't burning your draft card necessarily, but it's something, right? And these folks are saying, we're going to switch over. We'll go with the ILA, the International Longshore Association, which is basically run by folks on the East Coast. And these guys on the East Coast have a real reputation for being kind of mobbed up, kind of corrupt. What am I saying? Joseph Ryan ends up in prison. So they start their strike. They start their strike in May of 1934, and it's going and going. And the guy, and Ryan from New York comes over, and he goes and meets with the shippers and says, all right, we've got a deal. No union hall, 5 cents. I mean, it's just a sell. They have these workers here in San Francisco have a meeting, and they run them out of town. Now, don't do that to your leadership. You've got Democrat. Well, anyway. And this guy, Harry Bridges, is the one who takes over the union. And this is how we get in this country. We got an East Coast and we got a West Coast union for unloading stuff at the ports. It was here in 1934. Harry Bridges. Harry Bridges, they're going to form a group. They're going to later on change their names to the ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Workers Union. But at the time, they're still ILA. And they continue their strike. We don't agree with your agreement, we're going to continue your strike. In July, the decision was made, July of 1934, the decision is made, we're going to get rid of, we're going to open the ports. We're going to truck in all kinds of scabs, replacement workers, if you want to call them, going to bring them in, and they're going to unload the ships now. In other words, this means war, because these workers aren't going to take that. They're not going to have their jobs taken away, and so they set up these huge picket lines. And we know they battle with the police on July 3rd. It's a big battle with the cops, running battle up and down. It doesn't look like it looks today as you're walking down to the game, or over to the wharf, right? This is kind of a rough area, right? Trucks going by, all that. So they fight with the police. By the way, this is, and it's pretty brutal. On July 4th, it's Independence Day. So of course you do your barbecues, you have fun, no strike, nothing going on then. July 5th, you come back to fight. And they do, and the cops kill 2 people and shoot several more, and put into the hospital dozens. They kill them. Cars turned over, it's a mess. You can tell that's staged, right?
Mom, can I watch something?
Look familiar?
Yeah, man. Every week.
Mayor Rossi says we need the National Guard. Harry Bridges and the workers go, the cops are one thing. The National Guard, they've got, bayonets, machine guns. Let's do something different. They have a funeral. The funeral march on July 9th. They brought in this. It's the Clash. White youth, black youth, wait forward with the gun. The British Army is waiting out there. Weighs 1,600 pounds. So they say, new tactics. We're going to have a funeral march. We're going to bring the city of San Francisco out. We're going to stand in solidarity with us. This great funeral march. We're going to take over all of Market Street, go down to the funeral parlor of the Mission, and we're going to have tens of thousands of people out there to show that this
also get it. This
I
is
think, in
concise.
American
Yeah.
history, in California history, and it's ours. It's ours. No cops allowed. Of course, no cops allowed. Next day, of course, back to battle. But very quickly, people say, well, no, we can't do it. We need a general strike. We need to shut down the entire city. And they vote for it. All the major unions throughout the Bay vote for a general strike. And they say 45,000. It's a hell of a lot more than 45,000. For 4 days, they shut down San Francisco. Meanwhile, the police and other folks go and smash up the union soup line and organizing halls and so on. These are union guys sitting down in front of a train. This is owned by the state of California. They're going to use it to break the strike. The truckers are not going to move goods. The Teamsters are on strike, so they bring in the train owned by the state employees. These guys say, well, you can run us over. In the end, in a way, I credit, in some ways, Franklin Roosevelt. He's out on his yacht tooling around, and people said, there's revolution in San Francisco. And he goes, great. They can settle it. It's arbitrary. You guys are silly. I'm not going to send in troops. I'm not even going to end my vacation. And he gets Francis Perkins, the Secretary of Labor, to call him the mediator. It's a beautiful moment. They get the hiring hall. That's key. They get the hiring home. They get 95 cents an hour. Okay, well, they wanted it. They get the 6-hour day. And the ILWU is still on those docks all throughout the entire West Coast. The ILWU is the best paid folks in this country on the docks. And they strike every July 5th. They shut down the port in commemoration of Bloody Thursday. Woo! You go to this, right? So this is if you go to the Rincon post office in San Francisco, the Rincon Center. It's the biggest federally funded art project ever made. It's 45 panels of California history, and this is a piece of it. And of course, we wanted this jackhammered off the wall. Right? You can't have art about this. It's got to be, other things. There's Harry Bridges left in his hands. all right. Enough of that. Out of this ferment in the early 1930s, the U.S. government finally is forced to act. A lot of senators and congresspeople had these kinds of ideas before, but there was never that real push to get it done. And in 1935, we passed the Wagner Act. After all of this time that we've been talking about, you finally get, and I'm not saying this is the pinnacle, this is the end-all, be-all of organized labor, but it's a nice one. They say you have a right to join a union with no interference from your boss. Your boss is committing a crime if they interfere with you. You have a right to speak about the union. You have a right to, there are all kinds of unfair labor practices. They can't hire spies. It's got to be an independent union, not one owned by the boss where you get to sit in a committee and talk about what color toilet paper you want. So, you want wages, working conditions, all that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful, and then it does this. It says we need some democracy here. If you vote in a union, instead of risk your life and fight in the streets with cops and National Guard and then still lose, if you vote in your union, you got a union. And they are required to negotiate in good faith with you. And then, of course, we've had 100 years of, what does good faith with you mean? I don't know. Let's test that. But this, I used to not be the law. Who cares about the law? Let's fight in the streets. Right? No, this is important. And having, this is what I mean when I said of my general observations. You cannot abandon this field. The field of politics, and sometimes it's ugly and gross, and you get sold out all the time, and your friends aren't your friends, and all that kind of stuff. But if you abandon that field, they'll take it over and they'll use it to destroy you. They'll pass a criminal syndicalism act. You all passed the Wagner Act. Now it tied you, though. It tied you in some ways. right? There are rules that you can't violate either now, but a seat at the table. All right, I got 10 minutes left, right? 10 minutes? Is that the thing? We're supposed to go to 7:30?
We'll give you 20.
What? Well, let's see here. I was told, don't do that. We consolidate a lot of these gains during World War II. You get real serious. This is when LA industrializes. I had a whole great story about how the Teamsters actually organized LA. It's the Teamsters that organized LA. You know what? How many of you have heard of a sympathy strike? Secondary strike, right? What a beautiful tool. What an incredible tool for organized labor. In 1947, the government passed a law, and you can't do that. You can't, they made solidarity illegal. You think, all right, I'm in a union. These guys, these folks, even with the Wagner Act, aren't recognizing my union. They don't think the law is the law. What's a good way to organize fast? Get the Teamsters not to cross my picket line, right? Get the Teamsters to go out on strike and not move the goods to this grocery store. LA was 100% union pretty quick for grocery stores. By the way, I do the history of grocery stores. I'm the expert on supermarkets between 1925 and 1955 in Chicago and LA. 4 epic years of my life. Pardon me. And of course, during the war, you see enormous numbers of people moving in, and what you find is that idea of solidarity. Sometimes, I mentioned it at the beginning. Solidarity is a nice idea, and then when you try to practice it, there's all kinds of divisions that people come up with, and they say, well, these people shouldn't be under the purview of the union. These folks should get less pay. These folks shouldn't have comparable worth, and so there's that kind of fight. Is a fight that I had, again, another 10 slides on. Some of these. Aircraft down in LA. It's really something what happened. They organized by the tens of thousands in these industries. Who's that?
Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, that's Marilyn Monroe. Yeah, there she is. Anyway. But we also get FEPC, the Fair Employment Practices. The idea in aeronautics, with all those Nazis down there in Southern California, in aeronautics, there were almost no black people at all. There were like 50 black people working in the entire industry at the beginning of the war. The entire industry. And so the 1-2 punch of the Fair Employment Practices Commission, set up by Franklin Roosevelt, because this guy right here, A. Philip Randolph, of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, threatened to march on Washington. And Roosevelt goes, don't do it. And so he says, okay, give me something. Fair Employment Practices Commission. And you go from 50 people of color in aeronautics, in building planes and all that kind of stuff, to 107,000 by 1944. They would have frozen them out. The main ones, though, that the EPC would win in were some of those more militant CIO unions who were into organizing across race, class, across racial lines and gender too in some cases. Okay, let's go to this. See, I'm doing this. Oh yeah. You got to consolidate those gains after the war. They need you during the war. They're firing you after the war. Oakland General Strike, 1946. Retail clerks go out on strike. There's a big fight. Some people get beat up. And there's such an anger over that the streetcar workers, the streetcars in Oakland, the key route, back in the old days, if you drive one of those streetcars, you ride it down and you put the brake on. But here's the kicker, folks. If you're a driver of those streetcars, you take the brake home with you. You release it. I mean, you take it out of the machine. That thing's stuck there. It won't move. You got it. That's a good way to go. Right? So they go out, shut down. They shut down. There they are. All these streetcars. Right. Trying to protect those wartime gains. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not 1946. That's Occupy. Anybody go there? ILWU struck on this one. Shut down the force. I told Dylan I would show this picture. Even the animators, even Disney, even Snow White, they go on strike, right? They hate Disney, right? Talk about a Nazi. But here we go. I love this picture. Imagine how crazy Christy Nome would go over this picture. I mean, not only do they have the guillotine, happy birthday comes involved. They've got the guillotine, but they're shirtless and wearing black hoods. They're executioners. Well, anyway, it's the theater of protest. Huge fights in the studios, something we won't talk about, but it led to a kind of Cold War viciousness that I think we still suffer from today, where we lost a lot of that kind of solidarity. There were mistakes made on all sides here, but in 1947 we lose that great weapon, the sympathy strike, and you get guys like this, basically turning on your neighbors. What I'm going to do here now we're familiar with this story of Chavez and the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, which is AFL, mostly Filipino, and then the National Farm Workers Association, and then we create out of this UFW, right, United Farm Workers. I think we're kind of familiar with this story. What I wanted to do, though, is hit on a couple of little messages about these folks. There was a long struggle, an attempt to have solidarity in the fields, but also solidarity with all their customers, and a kind of civil rights movement. The UFW, the farm worker movement, was. It's a pretty impressive thing. By the way, Elfie Ballas, George Ballas took this picture. Some of you remember Elfie, little guy who used to run around with the camera all the time. One of their demands, right, no child labor. You see, agricultural workers were exempted from the Wagner Act. And they were exempted. You get to still do the same crap that you did to everybody else in 1910 to these folks. So you have the strike, you have the boycott. But one of the things I wanted to bring your attention to is the enormous power of people of that oligarchy, if you don't watch out for it. Here you've got this nationwide boycott going on. You're bringing in some of the biggest heavy hitters on your side, but these folks, your enemies, are very, very organized. And we kind of forget about this when we tell this story. Food for Peace program, 1969. Vietnam became the 4th largest importer of grapes that year. Right? Nixon himself becomes the biggest customer of grapes, the biggest buster of the boycott. Right? You think those grapes made it to Vietnam very big? They begin to pass anti-picketing laws, try to pass them. We stopped it here in California with Prop 22. The 1973 strike was a key moment here. They had actually won some serious gains in the fields. And then Nixon, in the White House, with Charles Colson as his right-hand man here, later on serves time because of Watergate, then finds God and everything's okay. But Charles Colson, he says, all right, what we need to do here is we need to make a deal with these guys in 72. So they've got Fitzsimmons, is kind of sitting at the presidency of the Teamsters while Hoffa is in jail. And they make a deal at the White House, basically, saying, all right, Hoffa, you get out of prison. You get out of prison. You got to promise not to run for the Teamster presidency anymore. He does. disappears. Fitzsimmons, we've got an indictment against you. We'll just not enforce the law. We're going to quash
Yeah,
the
it was kind
indictment
of like
against you.
not really
But you guys got to
historically
give us
very
something.
sound.
You got to support us in 72. They're already doing that.
Played
They
with it
supported
a lot,
Nixon in
as
72.
far as I heard. I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, I'm talking about this Teamsters. This is like complaining about the Catholic Church, and then people who are Catholics get really offended by it. I'm talking about human institutions that do things wrong. There's a lot of Teamster stuff that I love, okay? This is a bad one. Right? But they basically said, Colson worked with them. All right, you're going to go down to those UFW lines, and you're going to crush them. And the FBI was informed right out of the White House, if there's a UFW Teamster dispute, you support the Teamsters. They killed 2 people. I mean, it's a rough one, but this is organized power saying we don't want organized people in the fields, and we'll do anything to stop it. It's really quite something. We do get an Agricultural Relations Act, but you get the sense the fight is always on, folks. And I've paid attention to all sorts of violence and stuff. In my dissertation work, which I never did, I just read contracts the whole time, and we could do that, but I thought that might be a little bit boring. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of contracts, right? It's the boring, dull work of making people's lives middle-class lives. I kind of ignored that because you had to get the right to even do that, and that's kind of our story here. We've got our work cut out for us. The deal, if there ever was one, is off. There's been a 50-year attack on workers from above, I think. There was a kind of deal in the post-war period. All right, you guys don't demand too much, and we'll let you be our partners, our junior partners here. But that deal, and there are symbolic moments. Everybody knows about Ronald Reagan firing the PATCO workers, and that was like a symbol, open season on organized workers. But it was more than that. It was bigger than that. It was decades of work on the other side to finance real anti-labor stuff. And this is what it created. A world where workers' pay used to follow productivity. And this gap is there. This incredible gap is there. This is a little bit wrong. This has been redone. I couldn't find the new one. This dot is actually about right here, just so you know. It's not there, it's here, according to the latest statistics on this. That's union density.
Fuck that.
That's union density. We had 35% of people in the country in unions around that time, and over 50% in industry. Now, what to do about it? That's the big thing, right? We organized in public workers. We organized lots and lots of public workers. We've got those laws passed. We have huge numbers of public workers. That's great. But we need to reorganize private workers. There's public worker. And a lot of people say, well, the economy's changed. All the good jobs have gone away. I would like to suggest to you that they were good jobs because they were union jobs. When they weren't union jobs, they were shitty. That means that McDonald's makes a killing, folks. Starbucks makes a killing. We always say this, that if you gave the person another $2 now they are labor-intensive industries. That's kind of tough to deal with. A lot of their cost is labor. But give me a break. They could double the pay of folks and barely raise the price of that coffee, especially if they take some out of the profit. But the only way to do that is with organized workers using the gains that people died for. What are you doing this weekend, Paul? I'm working. What are you talking about working? People died for the 8-hour day. People died for it. We always talk about all these skilled jobs, or are these, we've got a global economy. Well, a lot of our jobs are stuck to the space that we're in. Look at the construction trades. Look at anything that has that is tied to a particular geography. A supermarket. You've got to negotiate the terms of your existence with the community that you serve. And we haven't been doing it like we should. And it's partly because of this 50-year war against us. We've seen some moments here in the 90s and so on, in the early 2000s. I remember the UPS strike in 1996. What a great moment that was. I was in Atlanta, the headquarters of UPS. The whole community came out. It was beautiful. Walking the picket lines with those folks. It was great. There we go. Yeah. All right. And then maybe I should end it with, I'm just 3 minutes late, but I should end it with,
Take 10.
you know, I mentioned this to my students sometimes. I had a student who loves Fresno High. He was a great student, really loves Fresno High, was into the history of Fresno High, all that kind of stuff. And he's going to teach at Fresno High now. Well, I told him about this. Remember this? 2006? This draconian law was going to come down and turn me into a cop? I mean, you know this, right? Teachers and priests were supposed to turn in undocumented immigrants. Turn them in. That's what, if that law had passed, that's what we had been required to do. It's a fugitive slave act type thing. No way, right? I'm not a cop. Anyway, I tell him about this. He hadn't heard about it. He goes to his teachers.
How the fuck do you know about that?
Yes, my students, I had hundreds and hundreds. Climbed over the fence, said, went right by the cops, were trying to pen them in, and went. This was a great moment, folks. I don't know if you remember this, 2006. We had 10, 15,000 people downtown, and this was a strike. That's what it was. Now, it wasn't union, called or something. It was larger than that, right? But this was the working class getting together and saying no. And then, of course, in LA, we had 500,000. And we veto this stuff from our history. We just forget about it, right?
I teach it
500,000
every semester.
people. Okay,
Every semester I do that.
That's good.
Because I remember I was teaching when it happened, and my students walked out.
We are
Should I
workers,
do it? I
not
said,
terrorists. That's
you might get in trouble,
2006.
but you're going to remember the day forever. And you stand up for your people.
Well, anyway.
That should be published.
Protect the frontline community.
I wish I had those slides right now. I'd show them tomorrow. I'm teaching in Avenel tomorrow. At high school. I'm teaching covered a lot.